Aston Villa's pre-season games are finished. We look at Unai Emery's tactical evolution in those games and which players stood out. Hello and welcome to All Villa No Filler. Please like and subscribe if you love the mighty Villa. Aston Villa won 3 and drew 3 of their pre-season games under Professor Unai Emery. There was a tactical evolution of sorts. Things did change a bit. So I thought I would chat to a data specialist, a man who really does study the tactics of a football team, to find out more about what Aston Villa were doing this summer. I met Daniel Pritchard, who, aside from being a data specialist, is also an Aston Villa fan, so a man of good taste. I started out by asking Daniel what he made of Unai Emery's tactical approach this summer.
I personally felt it was a bit more, is almost a refinement of what we were starting to do last season. So probably it was a lot of obviously working on that, playing out the back that in possession, that early build up phases, and you can see how we focused on that even in the transfer market with bringing Tielemans in, who's known more as a deep creator, bringing in Pau Torres. So these seems to be the attributes that Unai Emery's wanted to add to, and what we were what I thought we were looking to do in the last season was something quite similar to what De Zerbi's Brighton do. We were looking to draw teams onto us to create space further down the field. And what I saw in preseason was just a bit more of a refinement into that. We saw quite often we were in a bit more of a fixed 3-2 formation with one of the fullbacks pushing up during an early build-up. And what that seemed to do was to allow the two centre-backs to move even wider, and we seem to be looking to play the balls into the two 3/8s, the two number 10s, McGinn, Buendia, occasionally someone like Felipe Bades or Diaby. And what I found personally quite interesting about that, it's actually not too dissimilar to something that Gerrard was trying to do with us, albeit in a much worse way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I actually thought that myself sometimes when watching the fullbacks bombing on as high as they were. I did kind of think back to Gerrard trying that, I think, at a game against Newcastle that we lost 1-0. I think Kieran Trippier scored, and it was a year and a half ago now. But I remember that game, that trying that, and it just, I don't know, the structure just wasn't right for it to actually work. But what do you think in particular has noticeably evolved in preseason, in the summer series or Lazio Valencia, from last season's approach? Like, was there any specific position you thought things looked quite different?
There's no particular position that I felt was entirely change outside of I guess we'll probably get to the beginning of, I think it was the Lazio game where we actually built up for our right hand side rather than the usual situation where we built it from our left. What I did find interesting though was the introduction of Diaby not as the right winger. Like, I certainly expected that. I think I probably wasn't alone in that, but as the second striker, and how that then adjusted Ollie Watkins' role, I felt during the times where it was with Diaby, it was a bit more of an equal partnership. Occasionally, Diaby seemed to drop into the right half space and link play, but it seemed like Watkins was doing that perhaps a bit more than he was under Unai Emery last season. Yeah, seems like he's doing that a bit more, a bit more than when he pairs with McGinn, for example, who's almost always going to drop back in, look to link play.
And so which players really impressed you the most, would you say, during this preseason? There's been a few strong performers, I think, and I think one or two that look like they could be on course to have a really elite season. I think if anything's to go by, suggesting how they performed last season and how they're looking in preseason. But is there anyone to you who really stood out?
Well, I think the first obvious answer out of the youth setup is Jaden Philogene. He just has a lot of the aspects that I think Unai Emery was originally looking for in Nico Williams. If you take a look at his output at Cardiff, obviously Cardiff didn't have a particularly great season, but the things he really stood out for were getting lots of shots off, albeit in the poor side, these were not the highest quality shots. He did he managed loads of take-ons at quite a good percentage, really good 1v1. But the other thing he did really well, and that I think will impress Emery the most, he was a very dedicated defender. And we've kind of seen that in pre-season where his drop almost playing a bit further back sometimes than the other winger, almost as a right wing back or occasionally a left wing back. And I think that is now that it seems like it's staying, it's another tool in Unai Emery's belt to problem solve when he comes up against an opposition and kind of thinks he might need someone with pace who can do 1v1s but can also add that defensive commitment as well. But in terms of other players, there are a couple that I've not seen mentioned as much on Twitter, but those being Emi Buendia and Ezri Konsa. Buendia, I think, especially with the Diaby coming in and seemingly playing alongside Watkins, I think we saw in particular against Lazio, there's so much space in that front line that it's going to create space in between them for someone like Buendia who likes to drop in from the left hand side, pick up the ball either from a progressive pass from the centre backs or from the midfielders. And I think is someone who, with those, especially with those runners ahead of him, and who has that quality to pick out a pass, is someone I can see getting a lot of game time, especially on that left hand side. He's always been tenacious defensively, and that is just another thing that Unai Emery, I think, will want. He will want his side to be secure, to concede less goals than perhaps we have in pre-season. With Konsa, I do think this three at the back suits him, especially when he's got two great ball players like Luis or Kamara ahead of him. Sometimes he might be in the middle. Sometimes he might be out of the right centre back position. But particularly on those outside centre back positions, I think Unai Emery really wants to use those positions to play progressive passes into the 3/8s or 10s, however we want to call them. And you can see that in the way he is instructing Luis and whoever partners him, Kamara or Tielemans. You can see them actually moving together really, really narrowly. And it's number one, the complete opposite of what Gerrard did with his aides, which was to move them out wide to cover the fullbacks. But what that allows the outside centre backs to do is it allows them a clearer vision of the pitch. The central midfield coming in is there to move a marker out the way, potentially unlocking a passing lane into a McGinn or Buendia who's trying to find the space to pick up the ball between the lines. And that's really where we're going to see these kind of counter-attacking light transitions from settled possession, much like you see in a Deserby team.
And, you mentioned the back three there, when we're in possession. I sort of felt to me like a new innovation, really. I don't really recall watching Villa do that so often last season. Maybe I wasn't observant enough, but it felt much more explicit, I think, particularly in the summer series, with the fullback bombing on, and then the Villa defence going into a three, and suddenly the signing of Pau Torres made a load of sense, because before I thought, oh, what does that mean for Mings? What does it mean for Constant? Instead, actually, it was like, oh, so if he can play it, as an auxiliary fullback, left back, I guess, and then he can come across into the three, or Constant plays out right and he comes across into the three, and Torres is one of the centre backs. Suddenly, it all made sense then to me in my head. I was like, that's why I wanted that signing. But what do you make of that back three overall?
I think, yeah, I think you're right there. There was definitely an element of that last season, especially when Young was what one of the three, but it was definitely a bit more the case that it was two centre backs and a full back staying back, and we kind of saw that kind of flat back four out of possession and the kind of back three with a full back holding back a bit more in the last preseason game against Valencia when we had both Cash and Digne playing. And that looked a bit more like it did last season. But I think you're right. And when we started, Carlos, who I believe played in the middle of the three, and when we played Pau Torres, who again was I agree with you there, is someone that I was like, well, he certainly has the attributes for an Emery side, but how are we actually going to fit him in without losing the leadership and defensive aerial ability of Tyrone Mings? So all of a sudden that made perfect sense. And it looked much more like a explicit back three, like you say. And I think this may have been what Emery was working towards from the beginning. It's something he was a fan of at Villarreal, and he's used situational back threes throughout his career. So making that more explicit, adding more 1v1 defensive ability on the pitch, you only have to look at Pep Guardiola's Man City to see how important the one. He uses four centre backs. Just two of them nominally in right and left back positions. You only have to look at Manchester City to see how important that 1v1 ability is when you're pushing to that top end of the Premier League.
And that's it, that sort of one-on-one ability. With Villa's fullbacks, I think Alex Moreno would be the natural fullback you'd think would be the one who bombs on and pushes into that final third when we're in possession. He showed he could do it last season. He's a real canny signing, I think. But he's injured we don't quite know when he's coming back yet. It might not be till September time. So Matty Cash, he got a goal, assist, created quite a bit in the final third. He's a player I've not always been too confident about when he gets into the final third. But do you think he can play in that sort of more progressive fullback role, I guess, where he will be required to do a bit more in the final third than maybe he was last season?
Matty Cash is also a player I do have some question marks as well. He seems to be I would call him quite a proficient overlapping centre back, but that's not necessarily what he's having to do in a Emery system. So that kind of getting into the final third and getting shots off. We've all seen how his crosses and sometimes his shot can end up at the corner flag, so to speak. So I think for Cash, is it something he has in his locker? Yeah, I think so. Is it something that he's going to be able to do consistently and consistently enough for where Villa want to be? Is a question mark that he'll have to answer himself during the season. And we've been linked to right backs. I'm sure Cash has seen that and probably thinks to himself, my place might be under threat here. So I would hope that kind of pushes him further to kind of make that next step, like a lot of the other players have under Unai Emery. As for his performances in pre-season, I was there at Leipzig when we were promoted to the Premier League, and I think Gerard won every single preseason match he made. You can tell a lot about what a team wants to do, but not necessarily how well they're going to execute that. And I think that goes for players as well. I wouldn't take performances in preseason as too indicative of what they're going to look like on the pitch on match week one.
Yeah, it's a very good point because there is a long and storied histories of teams doing very well in pre-season and then turning up on the first day of the Premier League and getting battered. The example I always go back to is Tottenham. I think it might have been under either Juan de Ramos or Martin Jol, where I think they won like 8 in a row in pre-season, and the fans are obviously feeling, so elated, thinking it was all going to go and be sunshine and roses, and then I don't think they won a game until October. Manager sacked, and so it can, yeah, as you say, preseason can sometimes be a bit of a false dawn for a lot of teams. But another player who featured heavily was our new signing, Pau Torres. He played at left back on a couple of occasions. I think on one occasion he played well, and I think against Valencia didn't quite look so comfortable when Villa were defending, I thought. What did you make of him at left back? And do you think it's a role that he can fit into this season?
I I think, yeah, I would agree with you there. Certainly against Valencia, against straight line pace, he looked a little bit uncomfortable, and I for someone of of his quality, he's been linked with a lot of big clubs. I He certainly has the on-ball technical ability to be playing this role, uh, and defensively, he's always been the weaker partner in the defensive partnerships he's been in. He's a centre back very much used for his on-ball ability rather than his off-ball. In that instance, I actually feel like him being out at left back somewhat protects him,
Hmm.
especially in the Premier League where the game is more physical. You more regularly come up against elite level opposition. We have, I hesitate to call Tottenham elite level opposition, but in terms of the financials and who they actually have in their front line, it's a difficult ask for a centre back in the Premier League. Even when you're talking about teams in the bottom half, they'll have someone that can cause what Gerard might call a moment of magic. So I certainly feel that it will require some adjustment, but if I don't think Unai Emery would have brought him in and be trialing him into this role if he didn't think he could do it. And that's one that, as a Villa fan, I think Emery's earned the right to try what he wants without too much questioning.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that pleased me with Torres was just his ball distribution. I think we all know that's what he was brought in for, but some of the passing that he was doing was just, I could see him playing as a CDM if he ever had to. He's just got such lovely distribution, and at times there were these really low, pacey passes. He was hitting straight into a striker that was coming in to take it to feet, bypassing the midfield, and at times it came off very nicely in one or two of the summer series games. So I'd be interested to see if that is something that develops over the season. But was there anywhere that you kind of thought Villa looked particularly strong in the games you've seen?
Um, I certainly felt that the playing out the back, considering how nervous Villa Park was the few times I went there um, before before we had really settled into it. Um, that it just looks so crisp. They look so calm under pressure. And again, it's preseason. There's less pressure in these games. Um, than there will be. But it's we looked very calm under pressure at the end of last season, and that looks to have stepped up to the next level. Unai Emery's had his first full preseason there. He would have been drilling these players day in day out with how they're planning to build up, what structures they're using, where the other players are going to be, and by Christmas, these things will be so ingrained they probably won't even have to look. That aspect to me looked particularly impressive. What else stood out to me was just when we weren't able to get those transition moments from possession. Maybe this is again another performance aspect of preseason, but I certainly felt that Villa were able to work the triangles in wide areas with McGinn and Buendia, one of the wide players like Digne and strikers like Watkins. Those triangles to me looked far crisper. There was far more movement than I think we were seeing when Emery first came in, and I think what Emery was probably thinking about as soon as we finished in the Conference League positions was that teams are probably going to sit off against us now. This is something that happens to almost every team that hits Europe, and quite often they fail to adapt to teams sitting off them. West Ham, I think, dropped off in large part because of David Moyes'. It's a classic David Moyes pattern that they get to this stage and then struggle to break teams down that are sitting in a low block. Wolves under Nuno just could not break that seventh position because they couldn't week in week out take apart low box. And I think certainly that's what Diaby's been adding to do. He has a lot of close control. He's very good 1v1. One thing Villa did lack last season was just shots. Our only real shot getter was Ollie Watkins, and he is someone that adds another 2-3 shots a game, and that's just quite important. If you don't shoot, you don't score. And yeah, these kind of wide areas and adding shots into our game. I expect Villa to be maybe a little bit more open next season. Villa's games last season typically ended with under 10 shots for both sides, and I think coming up against the low block, you're going to sooner or later you're going to have to take a risk. You're going to have to put more than five players into your attacking formation. We saw in preseason how far the centre backs were willing to step up. They were almost in the opposition's final third, and that comes with risks. But yeah, I think we have the quality to deal with that, and I think we could be one to watch for the neutral next year.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think, you mentioned the low block. I think an informative game for Emery might have been Wolves when we lost 1-0. I remember Wolves sitting very deep, a lot of people in defence, and we just didn't really get a shot away. And I think a game like that might have been one that was informative for him to be like, more teams are going to do that to Villa this season. So we've got to figure out a way to score past them, basically. So hopefully, there were just a lot of innovative triangles I thought I saw pushing forward. And I think McGinn seemed to get into that role quite naturally. I think he played very well doing that. So I wouldn't be surprised.
McGinn is another player I've been very, very impressed by under Emery. Like his big problem under Smith and Gerrard, I felt was almost that a bit of the Mings problem. Every time he got on the ball, he was trying to do something, and he wouldn't play these simple kind of passes, which are essential when you're trying to keep possession. But he still has that eye for a spectacular pass, a spectacular goal, even. But just under Emery, he seems to have just calmed down a little bit and really, really like found his place in the side. And I know this is off topic, but how bad do Wolves look in terms of their summer business? I really do worry for them.
Yeah, completely.
Not too much.
Yeah. They're. I think every season or every couple of years there's a team that sort of just sells and doesn't buy. Leicester did it last year. Villa did it a few years ago. Stoke, I remember. Southampton did it last year as well. They just don't quite replace the talismanic players they lose, and suddenly it becomes a real problem for them. I think Wolves would be one to not watch for the neutral this season.
They were never one to watch for the neutral anyway.
No, they weren't. But Villa, we've made a few big signings. Yuri Tielemans, Pau Torres, Moussa Diaby, and who knows, maybe there could be one or two more to come in. What have you made of Villa's signings so far?
They've all been sensible, which is not something I thought about Villa's summer transfer business for quite some time actually. Um, Villa's general approach from the top down has been to give the manager what they want, what they feel they need to succeed with, um, which uh, under under Gerrard may have been a mistake. I think Villa's business now probably depends on how the Conference League playoff games go, and hope, that's just been announced today that we may be having a McGinn derby, which will be certainly be quite fun. But so far they're really quite sensible. They're sensible prices for the talent level we're getting, and there are minor concerns in all of them. All three, I think, are known for how they play in possession, but have some weaknesses or shortfalls out of possession. Diaby at Leverkusen was definitely accused of not tracking back, and that might be why we're seeing him in the second striker position as opposed to the right wing. We already talked about Pau Torres, and the same could be said of Tielemans not being the most mobile player. But with the transfer market being what it is, and talking about Eddie Howe and Talent ID, Newcastle paid 60 million for Torlini. Manchester United have paid similar for Mason Mount. I think both of them have paid those kind of big prices for what those players bring out of possession as well as what they bring in possession. And I think we may be finding almost a bit of a market inefficiency in finding players whose in possession value is being undervalued by the market at large, and that's why we've been able to get a Pau Torres who's been linked with Champions League clubs, and we managed to get him for something like 20 million under what his release course was supposed to be. There was a bit of, there was a week of heckling with Leverkusen over the Moussa Diaby, and it came nowhere near to that 50 million price tag that was originally quoted. In part, I think because other sides are very, very focused how they are out of possession, and Unai Emery is not a manager to forget the out of possession phase of play. But I think when you have a manager who has historically done so well at creating a solid defensive structure and improving players out of possession, you can almost take a bit more of a risk on these players, betting that Unai Emery is going to get something a bit more out of them, or find some way to mitigate those weaknesses.
Yeah, and Coutinho, big name at Aston Villa. He's a player who somewhat divides opinion. Some would say keep, some would say sell. What do you make of him?
On the keep or sell question, I think it's a case that, no matter what you think of his abilities, and it's very clear in these preseason games that his technical quality is second to none in our squad. The questions are really about physicality and perhaps mentality. Does it suit the Unai Emery way? So I think if someone comes along and offers to take that quite large wage off your books, you'd be quite silly not to take them up on that offer, regardless of how you feel about his technical quality. But as a player, he's very much. I find him to be the encapsulation of this Steven Gerrard moments of magic mindset. Um, and he produced two what I felt were very different performances. First against Lazio, and then what I felt was a much better one against Valencia. And I'll kind of go into that a bit because seen on Twitter, Coutinho was I think quite rightly getting praise for his technical quality, and he got an assist against Lazio. But I was certainly seeing things that I think Unai Emery would have looked at and thought, I'm not sure this guy fits my way. And one, there's one particular example. Coutinho, he wants to be on the ball, and it feels like since he moved to Barcelona in what was it, late 2017, 2018, no one's taken him aside and actually thought, I'm going to coach this player. He's still playing like it's mid 2016 and he's the main man, the number 10. It's not the direction football's gone in. We've moved even more into possessional structures, and especially in the Premier League, with even the teams at the bottom are Guardiola inspired. There's no one that really plays long ball football, as it were, anymore. So I can provide an example against Lazio. There was one moment where we're playing out the back, and we can do it quite slow, quite lethargically, to draw the opposition onto us. Seemed like Coutinho may have got frustrated with that. I just wanted to be on the ball, so dropped from that left wing position that he was in, almost level with Luiz and Tielemans. But that massively then affected the build-up structure. All of a sudden, Luiz and Tielemans, who are trying to keep very narrow to allow those channels into players like Coutinho, who should be holding their position up in the final third, all of a sudden that opportunity has gone. You've got a free down there. They have to shuffle across, and that's blocking passing lanes. And then all of a sudden, Paul Cameron Archer suddenly has to drop down into what was Coutinho's position to hold and to find space in. Ends up receiving the ball surrounded by two or three players completely on an island. There's no one there to help him, and inevitably we lose possession in that phase. And there was a number of instances against Lazio where I felt the freedom that the 3-8 role Unai Emery creates on the left wing was taken almost a bit too far. It started affecting the possession of others, the structure that we want to keep to win the ball back quite high up. But that was almost completely contrasted by the performance against Valencia, where I've long said if you want to get the best out of Coutinho, I think you need to play him as a second striker because of this tendency to drift round and not necessarily be the most robust defensively and physically anymore. And by playing him next to Watkins, it limited his freedom a little bit. He had to stay up to play in that position. He had to stay in the final third, wait for the ball. And I thought it was a much better performance where he was able to link with McGinn and Diaby in that right half space, but link with Philogene and create these triangles in the corner. And in the end, he gets the assist for Buendia, who was on the left wing, and that was a much more assured performance and one where you think maybe there's something in this guy. Maybe Unai Emery can get something out of him. Is he a player I would trust to play more than 60 minutes? No, not not really. But
Yeah.
and I do think if someone comes along and offers to take that big wage off your hands, you'd be silly not to take it. But is there something there under Emery? The last match against Valencia would say, yeah, I think there is.
Okay. Yeah, I think the Valencia game might have been kind of reflective of what games might be like in Europe and kind of suggestive of what Coutinho could do in the Conference League. I don't think it'd be too reflective of the Premier League, where there's a bit less time. And I think the conclusion I came to on our podcast was I'd sell, but with the caveat that I'm very happy to be proven very wrong about that if he does stay around. But one player who might not be sticking around is Aaron Ramsey. He's been linked to Burnley for £12 million. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I think it seems, especially with the rumored buyback clause, that to me seems like a a good deal for everyone involved. I'm surprised there's been as much opposition to it online as I've certainly seen. You know, I think people are talking about 12 million being a low price for a young, talented player, but he's also a player that has only played 29 games at championship level. It's not a lot of games to go by and say this guy is going to be the next big thing, despite the fact that at Middlesbrough and during those 29 games, his statistical output actually put me in mind of Todd Cantwell circa 2020 at the same level, at a much younger age. He's someone who I think is ready, despite the lack of games, is ready for the step up. But I don't think that opportunity is there at Villa at the moment. He'd have to get past, especially in that favoured 3-8 on the left side role. He'd have to get past his own brother. He'd have to get past. We just talked about Coutinho if he stops, who likes to play there. Buendia, I think, will get a lot of game time there. Jadon Philogene seems to be stopping around now, and I think winger there. We've got a lot of talent that plays there primarily, and that's before you start including potentially players like Douglas Luiz or Yuri Tielemans, who I think could thrive in that 3-8 role. There's a lot of competition for that spot, and I don't think Aaron Ramsey is going to get the game time to develop at Villa. The difference between this and the loan is, while we have no control, another club can come in and say, no, we want, a Man City could come in after a season and say, no, he's going to be our next big player, and we have no say over that. But we also have no say on how a player develops on a loan move. Kate Kane Hesler-Caden's a great example of someone who we sent out as a right back to probably get a bit more defensive now. But the teams that are getting these players on loan, they're not looking to develop a player for Aston Villa. They need to win now, and so he was played quite often as a right wing back, which was not what Villa would have ideally wanted. And just continue to maximize his strengths, and he's now back out on loan at Plymouth after having a not particularly great time at Huddersfield, and then returning to Villa and not doing anything much of note for the last 6 months. So I would say we have very little control over the players' eventual destination anyway. Why not take 12 million of pure profit for FFP? And if there is some reasonable buyback clause, is someone you can look at if, say, Buendia is Buendia is moving on. He's not. I wouldn't call him a similar player to Buendia, but in contrast to his brother, who is quite a dribbly player. He does a lot of 1v1s. He carries the ball forward a lot. Aaron is a much more of a passer in terms of his output. Actually, his 1v1s are quite, even at championship level, were not particularly great. What he's got a lot of are things like progressive passes. He impacts the box a lot. He was getting an expected goal or assist every other game, and with numbers like that, you'd expect him to you know not necessarily get a goal assist every game, but there'll be a game where he gets an assist or scores a brace, or that sort of player is quite valuable if they can contribute to the progression and build up, but then also crash into the box. So he's someone with a lot of potential, but with a buyback clause, I don't see the issue of him going to develop at another club, a very possession based side under Vincent Company, and potentially coming back in a few years. Yeah, we don't have control of it, but how much control do you have with it if that's the direction you wanted to go in?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Exactly what you said about that. The Villa's first game of the season or Premier League season is just a few days away now. When you look at the squad, how do you feel about it? And do you think it still needs a bit of strengthening in any particular role?
I think there's always more strengthening you can do to any squad. I think you can have the best squad in the league and still look at one or two positions and go, could we do better? Could we add more depth? So I would say I'm quite happy with the squad. There's two spots in particular where there's a noticeable drop off in terms of the depth. That being, the goalkeeper situation with Robin Olsen not necessarily being the best suited to playing out the back, and then as much as I think Cameron Archer has a lot of potential, he's not someone I would be all that confident yet of being able to take Ollie Watkins' place should Ollie Watkins get a long-term injury. But I think it's the case now where, yes, we may not have spent a lot of our transfer budget, but we've added three quite big earners to our wage bill now. In FFP terms, it's probably sensible now to wait and see how the market plays out and see if there might be any good deals that come up. I've seen recently that Villa have been linked to a number of young Spanish right backs, and presumably Emery and Monchi have a big list of promising Spanish fullbacks. But is that something we need to address this summer? I think if the right deal comes up, brilliant. If not, then the squad as it is, I think, is a good shape, and you don't want to risk adding too many new players and upsetting what was working last season.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think for me, it's if Watkins or Emi Martinez gets injured for a prolonged spell, I think that's where I'll be worried it could really cost Villa substantially. I think Archer's got real talent and potential. I think we just have to be patient with him. But I think he's shown enough already that he's somebody who can, worry Premier League defenses. And I think that when he gets his first goal, I keep comparing it to Jacob Ramsey when he got his first goal for Villa against Arsenal. We lost 3-1, but it was a screamer, top corner. And it just felt like from there, Archer had been or Ramsey had been threatening to go to a high level. But once he got that goal, it's that moment of a young player thinking, you know, I actually belong at this level. Like I really do belong here now. And I think that with Archer, he's just waiting for that moment. I think once he gets one goal or one key assist or something like that, then I'm like confident that he can sort of, like Ramsey, go up a level. But for him to, at this stage, step in for Watkins, if Watkins is out for a while, he's not ready for that yet. Watkins is quite a lot older than me, and so that does concern me a little bit. And there's Yon Duran as well, of course, another young player developing. Yeah. Today with Villa, we've the Conference League playoff draw has been made between, and it'll be either the John McGinn derby, as people call it, the Meatball derby, Hibernian, or Lucerne from Switzerland. How do you feel about that? It must be quite exciting to see Villa back in Europe again.
Yeah. I a lot of fans around my age. My only real memory of Villa in Europe was the Martin O'Neill years, where we didn't take it as seriously as a lot of us felt we should have. Europe's a real opportunity for some silverware, and cup competitions are a crapshoot that we've just yesterday saw in the Women's World Cup. The tournament favourites, the USA, have 11 shots saved, and all of a sudden they're out on penalties. England just today just scraped by Nigeria, a team that really they should be beating quite handily, but on the day anyone can come up with the right structure, have the right combination of abilities to really cause problems. That said, we've got the perfect manager to see us through that, and I think to me, if you get to the semi-final of one or two of our cup competitions this year, and maintain our points tally in the high 50s or pushing to 60, that to me is a successful season. So many clubs struggle with the change to becoming a European regular. The Thursday to Sunday schedule is absolutely brutal. You have a day of recovery, a day where you're going to sit in a lecture hall with Unai Emery for two hours as he talks details, and then you've got to get yourself up for potentially a game against Luton Town, or if it's on the Thursday, you might be travelling to Slovenia. That's why it's been so important to add players in the transfer market who have this experience. Pau Torres, Tielemans, and Diaby have all done that Thursday, Sunday schedule. Really, really difficult. So if we can maintain, our points tally in the league whilst pushing for one of those cup competitions, I really do think there's a great opportunity for the first silverware since, before I can even remember. Then that is an extremely successful season to me.
Completely. It definitely feels, a level of excitement with Villa and a sense of justifiable optimism that I think us as Villa fans haven't been able to experience for such a long time. It's a very nice feeling.
It's been a brutal few years.
Yeah, completely. Been high, mostly lows, and finally there's some highs. Hopefully coming in the near future. But Daniel, it's been absolutely fascinating listening to you and getting your perspective on Aston Villa and our tactics and some of the players and what might be happening under Unai Emery. And for those who want to find your work online, where can we find you?
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. So you can find pretty much most of the stuff I do through Twitter, it's at 1874 Pritch. I write for various outlets, but we'll be in the coming weeks and months actually launching a Substack W methodology, and it will act as a little supplemental to a lot of my written tactics and data pieces, going a bit behind the process behind how you build those pieces, how you analyze teams. So for those that are interested in delving a bit deeper into that side of the game, yeah, please subscribe. You don't have to pledge any money. I'm not that vain yet, and yeah, those are the major things I've got going on. But thank you for having me.
No worries. It's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you. Thanks for coming on, Daniel.
Cheers.
So that was my chat with Daniel Pritchard. Please follow him on Twitter. Check out his new Substack as well. Great guy, very informed, interesting to listen to as well, and interesting to chat to about mighty Aston Villa. There's more to come this week. There will be a rivalries episode with a Newcastle United supporter, which is guaranteed to be a lot of fun. And there will also be predictions and a preview for the season ahead later this week. So plenty more to come. And if you want to stay tuned, just remember, like and subscribe if you love the mighty Villa.